Good evening, everybody. Rather than adjusting the microphone for my height, I figured I would just use the wireless one here. So welcome, thanks for coming. My name's Rachel Fowley-Neufeld. I'm the events coordinator for McNally Robinson, Saskatoon. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of the Cree peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Arthur Slade back tonight for the launch of Dragon Assassin. We always love hosting you, so thank you again. Our thanks as well to Scholastic Canada for working with us on this event. Arthur Slade was raised on a ranch in the Cypress Hills of Saskatchewan. He wanted to be a writer from the time he was young and finished his first novel when he was still in his teens. Now he's the author of blank. I put a blank there because the official bio is always wrong. So it's more 25. Than 25, yes. He's the author of 25 acclaimed novels for young readers in a variety of genres, including science fiction, horror, mystery, historical fiction, and graphic novels. His book, The Hunchback Assignments, won the TD Canadian Children's Literature Award, and Dust won the Governor-General's Award for Children's Literature. So please join me in welcoming Arthur Slade. Let's give him a round of applause.
That's it. It's over. Thank you, Rachel, for the wonderful introduction. And I feel like I've said this a million times, but it does deserve to be said a million times. Thank you to McNally. I'm so glad that McNally exists. And whenever I come here, it feels like I'm coming home. And there's a nice little place you can just kind of lay down and you can read books. And you can buy them too, just in case you're thinking you could move in or anything like that. You're not supposed to do that. So yes, thank you for that. And thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. I don't know if you know, there's some really good TV shows on Netflix. So like you did have other choices tonight. Have you seen Dracula yet? It's don't watch the last episode. Anyway, but I really do appreciate that too. And I want to thank Scholastic, who did such a lovely job with this book. And there was a beautiful cover by Sally Gotchka. I hope I've said her name right. And whenever you write a book and you get your cover, it's kind of, you're always nervous. It's like, what's my book going to look like? And I was just blown away when they sent this cover to me. So I think they did a lovely job. And they also have paper cookies. So, I mean, really, there's nothing better than that. And finally, I'm going to thank my family, my wife and my daughter are here, and my mother-in-law too. And those poor people, they have to put up with me. When I'm making these weird fantasy lands with dragons and that sort of thing, I get really grumpy because I have to come back to the real world, and it just makes me feel kind of crazy. So they have to put up with that, but so far they have, and I really, really appreciate that. So now that the Academy Award thank yous are done, I will actually play something I hope that is interesting. See, it's like a little mini movie, very, very short. But I of course, I'm a geek. I love these little book trailers that publishers make, and Scholastic just put this out. So you're one of the first people to see it. And the book is, as you probably know by now, is called Dragon Assassin. And I really kind of enjoy the whole process of creating these other worlds and creating other characters. And by giving it the title Dragon Assassin, I thought that, there is kind of the most dangerous title I could think of, like an assassin riding a dragon. What could be more frightening than that, really? And I want to introduce you to actually the assassin herself, the one who is so nicely riding on that dragon right now. So her name is Carmen, and she's had an interesting life so far. And actually, I don't have to tell you, a lot of it gets told to you in the first little bit in the book. What I do want you to let you know is that there's an event that happens right away in the book, and it really changes her life kind of instantly and for the rest of her life. And I think that's all I really have to introduce. I lost my left eye during blades training at assassin school. My twin brother did the deed using a clever feint and a quick crosswise cut that caught me by surprise. Well, Carmen, that'll leave a scar, Corwin had said. Then he'd laughed that snorty, snotty laugh that had grated on my nerves 1,000 times since childhood. My vision had been too blurry to aim a cutting blow at him, and I wasn't certain if I even wanted to. He was the only family I had, and despite his laughter, he may not have known how deep the wound was. He often made a silly joke when he had done something stupid. But when I stumbled and fell toward the floor, Corwin dropped his blade and caught me. "Ah, sorry, sis," he said, holding me against his chest. Then the healers rushed in with their bandages and led me to the healing room. Maestro Elysius, my master, soon brought the bad news. "You will lose that eye, Carmen." I was 13. I'd been ahead of my brother on the honor roll, the top of the class. I often wondered if a bout of jealousy inspired my blinding. The blades were sharp, but we students weren't supposed to cut each other. The idea was to keep the mind sharp too. And I'd love to know where he'd learned the move. I'd never seen it before, and I was better with the sword than him. Did he have a secret teacher? Everything was harder with only one eye. The sword fights, the dagger throws, learning to avoid traps, even the poisons and potions were more difficult to pour. A half-blind assassin was a joke. I was pretty certain my fellow students had chuckled and celebrated as my position on the honor roll slipped. I had the knowledge and the skill, but the patch over my eye meant I had a weakness, and assassins were trained to exploit weaknesses. I'd have quit, perhaps to be a scullery maid, or to work in the massive wheat fields of the Akkad Empire, if only to get away from the other apprentice assassins who now scorned me. I especially wanted to flee from the kinder ones who looked at me with pity. But Maestro Elysius had insisted I stay. "Adversity will toughen your mental bones," he had promised. His support and my perseverance had kept me in school. 3 years had passed since the incident. I was finally 16 in my final week of classes. Corwin would graduate at the top of the honor roll. He was the best with bladed weapons, the best at hiding in shadows, the best assassin the school had seen in many years. He may even be better than the legendary Bandarius. All the kings, queens, and archons would seek to hire Corwin, maybe even Emperor Rima himself. I'd be lucky to get hired at all. So that's a bit of an introduction into Carmen's life and kind of how it starts out, and there are obviously some tough things that happen, but it is an assassin school, so there are supposed to be tough things. And one of the curious things about the whole process of creating a book like this is making a fantasy realm. And when you're making a fantasy realm, of course, you have to make it all up. And I'm actually really embarrassed to show you this. One of the things that you need a map. And this is the map that I drew. The reason I'm embarrassed is, well, A, it looks horrible, really. And you don't have to be nice to me. It really does look horrible. And I'm embarrassed because I spent years and years of my youth playing Dungeons and Dragons and drawing maps that were great. And suddenly, in my older age, I've lost that skill. It's just so very, very sad. But you can see here that there's all these different countries, and you can kind of get the idea of what the land is like. I want you to kind of look at the very bottom of the map. It might be hard for you to read, but the very bottom of the map says, the land of... That's the part you can't read. That's probably the hardest part to read. And what happened to me is I wrote this whole book. I had all these characters. I had this land that they were going to live in. I didn't have a name for it. And I just couldn't find a name I was happy with. And you know how if you read the Chronicles of Narnia, that takes place in... Narnia, right? And Lord of the Rings is in Middle Earth, and this is in and that just doesn't really work for people wanting to read the book. So what I did though is, thankfully there were people out there who can actually draw maps, and I sent this off to an artist, Garnet White, who's lives here in Canada, in Montreal, and this is what he came up with. So from my map to this map is a pretty big leap, and you can see this looks like, it's a real place, and that's one of the reasons why you create a map, is you want to feel like what you're thinking about this whole world is a real world. And so he did this lovely job with a map. You can of course see all the different cities, and I'll just point out the scene I had just read takes place in the Red Assassin Keep, and it's right here. There, right there. Isn't that exciting? So when all these things are marked, they do feel more real. And Garnet actually did this lovely thing where he took this map and he put it on Google Earth. And so I was able to track things to see how long distance was between different places. And that's really important when you're writing, because when your dragon is going to be flying from Acadium down to Avernus, you want to know exactly how long that is and exactly what the distance is, but how long it will take the dragon to get there, because you don't want to fly there too fast. So you got to keep track of these things. And so this was a really helpful thing for me to have when I was writing and rewriting the book. You'll notice at the bottom, it now has a name. It is the land of Alos. And, sometimes I say Alos. I never pronounce the words I make up the same way twice, so you're welcome to pronounce them however you want. And you know what that is? And again, I hate to admit this. I sent the map to Garnet. Garnet read it. He looked at that scribble on the bottom. He goes, I think that says Alos. So he ended up making up the name for my land. It's worked out fine so far. So that like I said, I really appreciate it. And it's one of the fun things about creating books, and of course I do comic books and those sort of things, are working with other people and seeing what they do with the world too. So I do want to introduce you to and I hesitate to say this because I don't want the other characters I've written to feel jealous, but I want you to introduce you to probably the favorite character that I've written so far, and his name is Brax. And this is only a couple pages in. This is the first time that Carmen meets Brax. What I should explain to you is, in the world that Carmen lives in with these assassins, the assassins, whenever they go to do their job, they travel on these giant black swans that are silent. And so they'll land on a castle parapet and go in and introduce themselves and their knives to people that they've met, and then go back out and fly away. And so that's really kind of impressive and frightening. I love that whole image. But Carmen does, of course, meet this dragon. And one of the things that happens to Carmen is she is actually failing. She's failed her class. She's not going to graduate, and she needs to go and do some special thing that will give her extra marks. Everybody likes having extra marks, right? And the special thing she has to do is go and get an egg from one of these giant swans, where the wild giant swans are nesting in the top of the mountains. And so she has to climb up there. Oh, this is an important point. She has to dress in a feather suit so that she looks like a swan. So it's actually kind of goofy. She's dressed in all these feathers, climbing up a mountain, goes up there. The swans don't accept her. She gets knocked off. She ends up landing near this cave. And she's thinking, okay, if there's a cave here, maybe I can find something that will really impress my masters. And what she does find there are 3 dead bodies. And she knows that they're mercenaries. And she thinks there's got to be something important in that cave. And this is what she discovers. "You're too big to be a crow," a deep male voice said from farther inside the cave. "What are you, my feathery friend?" I held the dagger out in front of me, looking right and then moving my head farther to my left. No sign of the speaker. "A one-eyed crow," he said. "Come for the pecking, did you? These idiots came for the pecking and they got pecked." I still couldn't see the man. He had to be huge, judging by his voice, though small men could have big voices. If he'd killed these mercenaries, he was powerful too. Yet why was he still here? The mercenaries had been dead for weeks. "You're a quiet crow. I hear the quiet crows taste better." That made me shiver. Eating the flesh of fellow humans was completely against mortal laws. Clink. The sound of metal and of something shifting. I recognized the clink from the prisons in the assassin fortress. They had chained me and my fellow students in a cell as part of our education so we could learn to escape. Real bound prisoners had also occupied the cell. They had chained this person in a cave. Why hadn't they just stood back and finished him with their bows and spells? Clink, clink, clink. Was he moving toward me? I stepped back, nearly tripping over the body of the female mercenary. "Why so scared?" The man with the big voice was coming closer. I reached into my costume, found a handful of dust, and tossed it. It was an old mixture, and I prayed it would work. The moment the sand-like substance hit the air, it glowed brightly. And leering at me, not blinded by the sudden light in the slightest, was a dragon. And it was not just any dragon, it was a Scythian dragon. They were rumored to be the most intelligent, the strongest, and they could regenerate. If you cut off a leg or a wing, it would grow back in time. He was not huge, perhaps about 25 feet. He was lithe and he had bluish-black scales and long, leathery wings. The chain on his hind leg led back to... The light failed. Then light returned. The dragon had snorted out flame and a small pile of dried leaves began to burn. "You look surprised, Crow," the dragon said. A scar ran between his eyes and along his snout. "You were not expecting me?" "No, I wasn't. What are you doing here?" "Biding my time." "For what?" I asked. He moved his back leg, causing the chain to rattle. "For freedom, to be out of this stinking hole and winging through the skies again." His ribs were visible under his scales. It had obviously been a long time since he'd eaten, but despite that, he didn't look weak. He could gobble me up in 1 or 2 bites, and I was standing right in front of him. His face was expressive, eyes gray, intelligent, and penetrating. I tried to remember what I'd learned about this particular dragon. All dragons were rare, but the Scythians were the rarest. That much I could remember. There was also a story you could get 3 wishes from a Scythian dragon. My maester had taught me to be observant. The chain led to the cave wall where it was bolted into the stone. The chain also glowed slightly as though it had its own source of illumination. It had to be magic. I didn't think a regular chain could hold a dragon. There was a neatly piled collection of small bones behind him that looked like the remains of children. I recoiled in horror. No, they were small animal bones. I recognized a rabbit skull, so his captors had been feeding him. There was a stack of books next to the bones. Could dragons read? "You're spending a lot of time thinking," the dragon said. "I grow bored." "How did you get here?" I believe the situation is obvious to any half-witted crow. He was talking down to me. Then again, he was a dragon, and I was only a mere mortal. "These men trapped you in this cave." He snorted tiny flames of derision out his nose. Any crow chick could come to that conclusion. "The bones behind you suggest you've been here for many days, weeks perhaps, and the books indicate that you like to read." The dragon nodded. "Only fools hate reading. Plus, it passes the time. Keep using your little bird brain." I pointed at the body in front of me. He was a wizard. "He knew a few spells." "He bound you here." "Yes, he did. And even though he's dead, his magic persists." "Correct." He smacked his talons together, making a clapping sound. He was a clever enchanter. He told me that his magic would continue for decades, but I'd hoped it was a lie. If he wasn't dead, he'd be getting the last laugh. "But how did they capture you?" I asked. It surprised me how calm I was. All those years of meditating in a windowless room had paid off. But I also loved puzzles, and this was a fascinating puzzle. "They must have discovered you sleeping here." "I sleep with one eye open. It's the only way to slumber in the human realms." I gestured towards the bodies behind me. "Then these mercenaries lured you to this cave. But what could entice a Scythian dragon? Gold?" The dragon laughed. "I can get as much gold as I want at any time. Just burn the guards off a treasure wagon and fly away with the treasury. Unlike you humans, I have no need for gold." "Did they use sheep?" "Oh, don't be stupid. I can eat sheep whenever I want." I glanced around me, taking measure of everything I could see. Bones and books and 3 dead bodies. I drew a blank. "Think, Carmen, think." "You came here to learn," I said finally. The dragon smiled, showing long rows of glittering teeth. "You are not such a dumb bird. Don't call me a bird, and don't call me dumb." "Oh, you are a touchy little featherling." "Yes, they lured me here because they promised me ancient texts that I had not yet tasted. I wanted to understand deeper truths so I could return to my land with new knowledge, new power, and they used that desire for knowledge against me. They doused some mutton with a sleeping draught, waited for it to take effect, and chained me here." "But what did they want from you?" I asked. "That too you should be clever enough to figure out." 3 wishes, I said. "What did those idiot maesters teach you in assassin school? Folk tales? Lies?" "You know I'm an assassin." "You all smell the same," he sniffed. "Like almonds, if you must know. But no, it wasn't wishes they were after. That is an old story told by old men trying to scare grandchildren." "Then what was it?" I asked. "I tire of this game, child." He raised his head so he was looking down at me. "What I want you to do is to pick the lock on these chains and release me. And in return, I won't kill you. Do it now." So there's the first little introduction to Braxton. Doesn't he seem like a friendly sort? Someone just like to chat with, over dinner? No? Yes?
My dad got me this a few months ago.
Your dad is very wise. So one of the funny things about writing a book is that they end up going into all sorts of different places. And this is the version that appears in the United States, in the UK, and Australia. And this is actually a self-published version, the version that I put out there. And I know you look at it and you go, wow, that is such a different cover. It looks so much like the dragon looks way meaner. And it looks more young adult, probably. And even the character looks older. And that's because when this is sold, it's actually down there. It's going to an older audience, even though the original book that's sold in Canada is for kind of 10 and up. This one, the people who are buying it, and I know this because I run different ads to sell the book, are usually like 35 plus. And they're looking at these covers and going, this is the book I want to read. And it's been getting good reviews, so they seem to like it, so that's all very positive. The one other strange thing about this whole kind of publishing this way is I actually release the book in episodes. So there's only like 100 pages at a time that are released every month. So people just read 100 pages and they go, oh, what's going to happen next? And they read another 100 pages. So it's been really fun to write that way. What you get here in Canada is 3 episodes made into one book. So you get the whole story. They have to wait until they get to the end. So that's worked out for us. Right?
Yeah.
I am going to point out that this is me a long time ago. And this is back in 1997. This is actually my very first book launch. That's Beatrice Miley, who was running the Saskatoon bookstore way back then. And the book was called Draugr. And I'm just pointing that out just because this is now my 25th book, so it feels like I've reached some kind of landmark. And I'm really happy about that. And one of the things, because I was thinking about, obviously I've done quite a few launches, and I remember there was a moment in that launch that was kind of, I won't say life-changing, but it was really made me think. And there was a parent who got up, a parent I'd never met before. He got up in the Q&A section and said, I just want to thank you for being from Saskatoon and for writing a book that my kid can read. And I just thought, wow, that's just not something I really thought about before, because mainly when I write books, I'm just writing it for myself. I forget that other people are going to read them. But it made me think about how happy I am to be part of this community and part of this writing community, and how important it is. So anyway, that's enough about that little. Sorry to take you all back so long, so far in the past. It's just such a long time.
He was alive. You're alive, right?
That's right.
That long ago.
Yeah. So you can almost warm your hands on. This is officially the Q&A part of the presentation, and you are welcome to ask me any questions. I will attempt to answer them, and Rachel will be running around with a microphone and throwing it. No, she won't throw it at whoever asks your question.
It's too expensive to throw, but I will hand it to you.
Yeah, no mic drops.
No, please. Okay, we've got a question in the front here.
Could I bring this up?
Sure, I think that would be okay. Do you want him to sign it afterwards?
I'll sign it afterwards, okay?
Yeah. There'll be
I'll
lots
hold
of
on
time for
to it you
signing.
if you want.
For safekeeping.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else who has a question for Art? Don't be shy, the mic's not scary, I promise.
But the authors, obviously.
Oh, here we go. Oh, I'll come back to you, okay?
Sweet.
So Art, how long does it take you to write a book, and is it different for every book?
It is quite a bit different for every book, and the books that I curse are the ones that take a really, really long time, and partly because if it takes me 2 years to write a book, then I'm only making half the amount of money I normally do. Not that I want to talk about money, but that's what I want to talk about. But kind of on average, I have 25 books. It's been 23 years. It takes me about a year to write a book. This book actually, it probably took me 4 or 5 months to write, which is really fast. And I feel lucky in a way that it worked out that way, but it was also kind of, in some ways it's the way I designed it in my head, in that I knew I wanted to move really quickly. I didn't want to write a book that spent a lot of time kind of describing, the background of the characters, that sort of thing. I just wanted it to be this really fast book that people would burn through. And that's the way, when I was writing it, it just felt like everything was just coming out really, really quickly. So that doesn't happen every time, but I wish it would. I really wish it would.
We had a question up front here.
What book are you working on now?
Well, I was even working this morning. Can you believe it? On a day when I'm launching a book, I actually did some other work. The book I'm working on is actually the third book in the Dragon Assassin series. So I'm working on that right now. The second book isn't out yet, obviously, and since we're just launching the first one, it doesn't go that quickly. But of course, you have to write everything long before it comes out. And so right now, there's a whole bunch of things. If you've read the book, there's a couple questions that kind of get asked. They get answered in the third book. So that's my way of making people buy the second book so that they can get to the third book. It's just a horrible trick that authors play on you. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Go.
Are any of your books going to become a movie?
Oh, if my books became a movie, like I would take my daughter to where would she want to go? That's a good question and unprompted too. So I appreciate that. For those of you who don't know, that is my daughter. This book is not yet optioned, but a previous series of mine called The Hunchback Assignments has been optioned by a company in Australia. And they are actually I've been working for the last 4 or 5 years to turn that book and that series into not a movie, but into a TV series. And so what I've seen so far is the script for the first episode, which I thought was really quite good. And they are at the kind of the process of finding partners. Movies are really, really expensive. And so they have to find all these different kind of companies to work together who say, yeah, we really like this. We can do this right now. Here's the money. We'll do it. And so far they're at we really like this part, but not at the money part. So when they get to the money part, then maybe something more will happen. Cross my fingers, because that we'll go out for dinner or something. I'll take you and your mom out for dinner. And anyway, no promises.
So when you write a series of books over time, do you ever find yourself more attached to one character that you've written compared to others, or is it just the character at the time?
I think you do, or at least I become more attached to the characters I have in the longer series. Because you spend, I just mentioned the Hunchback Assignment, so that's 4 books. I spent 4 years with those characters, and the main character, his name is Modo, and not so much that I identified with him, but he became so much a part of my life in a way that it was just really sad to get to the end of that book and go, oh, well, okay, goodbye. Guess we won't talk again unless they make a movie. And the same with this, because here I am in the third book, and I really feel like I've been with these characters for a long time and really enjoying them. I mean, of course, I'm speaking with such joy about Brax, the Horrible Dragon, but I do tend to feel closer to them than, say, a book that I've just written. There's only one book. Even though you really, really care about those characters when you're writing the book, it's kind of it almost feels like a different relationship with when there's only one book. It's like, I only knew them for a year. These ones I knew for 4 years, so I'm so much closer to them.
Where do you get the ideas of the book from?
Oh, the ideas, yes. Well, I'd like to say they come from this company in Pennsylvania where you pay for 5 cents, you can get an idea, but it doesn't work that way. The ideas come from all sorts of places. Sometimes they'll come out of the blue. Like, I have no idea why I get an idea, and it'll just appear in my head, and I go, oh, I got to write a story about that. But most of the time they come because I'm reading other things, or there's something that is really interesting to me. So with this book, I just really wanted to write a fantasy book, and I really like the whole idea of somebody riding a dragon. To me, that's really interesting. Like, has anybody ever been on a horse before? Like, riding on a horse is, it's a lot of fun, right? Can you imagine riding on a dragon that flies around in the sky and, it has fire and talks to you? All that to me sounds like even more fun, as long as you could stay on. And so that's just kind of the basic idea. I thought, I got to write about this, and then who's going to ride that dragon? That's what authors start to do, is we ask ourselves questions. Sometimes when we're in the room just talking to ourselves, and then people take you away. Anyway, but I said, well, who's going to ride the dragon? That's when I started thinking about this assassin character. So sometimes these ideas are just, they kind of build on themselves, is how they come from too. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Sometimes I just say, I don't know where they come from.
go.
So you mentioned you write for yourself. Other than yourself, do you have a target audience or an ideal reader in mind when you're writing?
I think it depends on the book. A lot of times when I'm writing, I'm thinking about what I really enjoyed when I was younger. The thing I'm trying to capture is, it's harder as you get older, but when you're younger, you can read a book and you can just disappear into it. It's just like, this is the most, like, I'm in that world, right? When I was reading The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, I was there, right? With all those, going on all those adventures. And I think as you get older, at least for me, it gets a little bit harder. It's rarer when I find that book that I can just kind of vanish into. So that's kind of who I'm writing for. It's kind of how I felt when I was around 13. But sometimes I don't know who the audience is until I'm done the book. And then I send it to my publisher and they go, oh, did you know you were writing it for this age group? I go, oh, I was writing for an older age group. I guess I didn't quite hit the target right. But they're quite happy, whatever target, as long as you hit a target.
Maybe one more question for Arthur? Or two more. I'll start here and then we'll move to the back.
When you're writing a story, how is a good way to start?
Oh, how is a good way to start? Like that, actually. That gets people's attention. It reminds me of your question. It's a really good question because it's something that we ask ourselves all the time. Does the start of this story really get people's attention? And I was reminded of somebody who used to write comic books, and they asked him kind of a similar question, like, how do you start? And he said, well, you start a comic book by blowing up the world and then seeing what happens next. And my books aren't that dramatic, but I like to find something that I know will be really interesting, kind of a hook that when you read it, you go, oh, I've got to read the rest of this story. I mean, this story, it starts out with Carmen fighting with her brother and being blinded. It's like, oh, that's horrible, but what happens next? And so that's, when I'm writing, that's kind of what I'm looking for.
Got one more question at the back here.
Okay.
What's your favorite book you've ever written?
Oh, again, it's hard to say exactly. Now that I have these books, they're kind of moving up there. But I think my favorite book out of all of them, and sometimes I answer doubly, is Dust, which was somewhere among my fourth or fifth book. And it's a book that's set in Saskatchewan and set in the dirty 30s, which doesn't sound very exciting. Who wants to be in the dirty 30s? But it was one of those books that I was just really, when you get an idea, sometimes in your head, the idea seems great, and then you write it down and it just doesn't turn out. Dust was one of my books that when I got the idea and the sense of kind of, it's a scary book, so I wanted it to be frightening, the sense of that story, it came out almost exactly how I wanted it to. So that is my favorite book.
Well, huge thanks again to Arthur Slade for being here tonight. Maybe I'll pass it back to you if you have any final words you'd like to say.
Well, I think just finally, I'd just like to say thank you again so much for coming out. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to signing books, and I believe there are cookies. Is that all
Yes,
that?
there are cookies.
Yes.
I will bring those out momentarily.
Because that's what people came for.
I know.
I mean,
I promise, the cookies, they are real.
don't make
They'll
them
be out.
angry.
And of course, like Art said, he'll be signing books. We have those available for purchase. You're more than welcome to have them personalized. And then the folks at the till can help you on the way out the door. And let's just give Arthur Slade one more big round of applause. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.